An untrained mage must recover a stolen magical artifact to protect her island nation from ravaging pirate hordes. In the Drowning Eyes. That's the book I'm reviewing on this episode of SFF180. It's part of the Tor.com novella line, and it is also a review I am doing in conjunction with this week's Diversathon. So thank you all so much for joining me. Thomas here, your host as always. Okay, the Tor.com novella line has been a wonderful thing for SFF publishing since it debuted late last year. It has offered some new writers an opportunity to break into the field with stories that do not demand the commitment of a full novel, while at the same time providing these stories with the considerable publishing and promotional resources of the genre's leading imprint. But as an art form, the novella is a very tricky beast. Now, skilled writers can work within the very specific word count that the format requires and still produce tales that are complete and incredibly fulfilling. But if you haven't quite worked out the chops to split the difference properly between short story and novel, you can very easily end up with something that feels like, well, an incomplete novel. And such is the problem plaguing The Drowning Eyes, an ambitious and imaginative high fantasy saga that just misses the mark due to an inescapable, nagging feeling of incompleteness. The story begins with an almost heartbreaking sense of promise. Set in an archipelago called the Jahiri Islands, it introduces us to a matriarchal maritime culture whose people's livelihoods are fully dependent upon fair winds and full sails. This is such a wondrous and colorful departure from standard landlubber epic fantasies set in the typical medieval European pastiche that my eyes and ears immediately pricked up in attention. We are introduced to an appropriately diverse cast of salty dogs, in particular the crew of the Giggling Goat, which is a bit of a bizarre name for a fishing vessel, but one which shows a sense of whimsy on Foster's part that just imbues her world with that much more character. The Goat's captain is the prickly and temperamental Tazir, and she and her crew are struggling. A fearsome band of pirates known as the Dragon Ships have not only been waylaying Jahiri vessels, but have launched a full-scale, devastating attack upon the storm temples of the Wind Speakers, who are the mages who can control and direct the weather. And the religious icon, which functions as, sort of the Wind Speakers' magical network router, has been stolen, and now nothing stands between the pirates and the vulnerable islanders. Tazir and company are approached one day by a young girl who seems to be a little too rich for her own good, and who spins an obviously bullshit story about fleeing an arranged marriage. Turns out, surprise surprise, she is actually Sheena, the last surviving Wind Speaker, and a girl who is such a newbie to the use of magic that she has not even completed her training, which involves the replacement of her actual eyes with stone. Sheena has been tasked with recovering the stolen icon at all costs, and the story goes on to recount her quest for the missing item, with Tazir and her crew along, experiencing a perilous journey that they had not bargained for. Okay, so far, so awesome. But it is in the unfolding of this narrative that its shortcomings become inescapable. Foster absolutely wants to pack a full novel's worth of story into all of this, and so as a result, important scenes feel rushed, pacing is erratic, backstory and world building feel inadequate, character relationships go nowhere that isn't predictable, and it all wraps up in a sketchy denouement that feels pat and unsatisfying in its attempts to resolve and tie up all loose ends. The Dragon Ships fare the worst. They are forever an abstract threat, an offstage antagonist, only seen in a single sequence, which admittedly is probably the strongest one in the whole story, in which Sheena's inadequate control over a magically generated hurricane causes quite a bit more collateral damage than she wanted. But even there, the pirates are only exist to be wiped out en masse, like, those hordes of tiny little digital orcs in the Peter Jackson Tolkien movies. As a gruff and hard-done-by grizzled sea captain who is also a queer woman of color, Tazir should have qualified as the most badass epic fantasy character of the year. And sure, she's fantastic up to a point. But Foster does little with her development, other than presenting her world-weary cynicism as a foil to Sheena's youthful sense of duty and determination. An attraction to Sheena on Tazir's part, which naturally causes some tension between her and Shakal, who is her quartermaster and lover, just sort of feels like a bit of perfunctory drama. So what would have solved nearly all of this story's problems? Simple. About 200 more pages. Because this is how you feel upon finishing reading The Dragon Eyes, that you've just read a 300-page novel that somehow had 2/3 of its content go missing. I mean, really, for the opportunity to have had more early scenes showing life aboard Tazir's ship, showing Sheena's initiation into the Wind Speakers, just greater immersion into the whole maritime culture of the Jahiri Islands generally. I mean, it's all there, but it also isn't. Now, I will not, at the end of the day, say that you shouldn't read The Drowning Eyes, especially if it's a story that has already kind of piqued your curiosity a little bit. After all, you are quite likely to find many things in it that are worth admiring, even knowing that it has its issues. I can only hope that once we get Emily Foster's first full novel in our hands, that it provides the complete and enriching storytelling experience that is promised here. Because I know Emily Foster is capable of creating amazing worlds and filling them with people I want to get to know. So just let me sail into one. And that is all I have time for in this episode of SFF180, everybody. Thank you, as always, for joining me. Remember, the most important thing, these are reviews. You will not always agree with me, but if you enjoyed watching, please hit the like button, share the video far and wide with all of your SFF reading friends, and above all, please subscribe if you have not done so. That is how SFF180 grows as a channel. You can also support the channel at its TeePublic store, where there are shirts and some nifty related merch, okay? And until I see all you lovely, awesome people next time, happy reading.